Welcome back to Velshi and Rule. We're in the dog days of summer, but the 2020 candidates are not taking any time off. They're peppered across Iowa and New Hampshire today, courting voters in those early states, even unveiling plans that are focused on rural areas.
And the action isn't just on the Democratic side. Former South Carolina Republican Congressman and Governor Mark Sanford heads to New Hampshire today, exploring the potential for a 2020 primary challenge to President Trump. On Monday, Sanford released a political video explaining why he was looking into a bid and what he sees as the biggest danger facing our nation.
I'm Mark Sanford. I come from the coast of South Carolina, where we get storms that hit in the late summer. And I'm here to say that there's a big storm coming. I say this because our country is in the most precarious financial position that we've been at since our founding in the Civil War. Not dealing with it could crush our economy. It could wipe out whatever we've saved. It could even destroy our republic. Others have suggested running in the Republican primary against the president as a way of elevating the issue and changing the debate. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that we have to do something.
Joining us now, former Congressman Mark Sanford. Congressman, that sure seemed like a presidential campaign ad. Would you like to announce that you're running?
You're getting me ahead of my skis. No, ma'am. I'm going up to explore a few things in New Hampshire this afternoon, though.
All right, well, then let's talk about your economic message, because President Trump and many Republicans argue that this is the best economy ever. They argue that trickle-down economics would work, that the tax cuts would pay for themselves, and the president said he's going to wipe out the deficit. Now, today, we know that the deficit is up 27% from this time last year. And I want to share for you how Fox News talked about this morning, because that is where the majority of Republican voters tune in to get their news.
The Treasury Department just released some data that actually bolsters the president argument. Treasury is saying that so far this fiscal year, China has paid us $59 billion in tariffs, and that number is up about 75% year on year.
Okay, Congressman, let's start with this.
The graphic didn't actually match what the reporter said, because they wouldn't actually make a graphic that says China's paid us $59 million, because that'd be a lie.
Or they might make that graphic, but it's untrue. The president in the last hour is postponing tariffs because of the Christmas shopping season, proving the point we make every day that China doesn't pay the tariffs.
We do. U.S.
importers do, and then they pass it on to consumers.
Correct. But let's also move away from fantasy land, which is to say, whether they did or they didn't, and they didn't, correctly, to your point, $59 billion is an absolute drop in the bucket compared to the $1 trillion deficit that we will run this year. We have the largest accumulated debt that we've ever had in our country's history. Spending is at a greater level than it's ever been before, and deficits are at unprecedented levels in peacetime. And so, you know, to talk about the 59 is just a red herring. I mean, it's completely at odds with the economic reality that our country is confronting, based on this administration and based on Republicans. In fairness, I'm a Republican walking in what has been traditionally a cornerstone as to what the conservative movement and the Republican Party has been about, which is some level of financial sanity.
When you're in South Carolina having lunch with Lindsey Graham, or when you call Rand Paul on the phone and you talk about these things, what do they say back to you?
Well, I haven't had lunch with Lindsey. He's up in D.C. and I'm down here in Charleston. But I have had lunch and visit and conversation over the course of my 25 years in politics with thousands of different people at the grassroots level. And what I do know is that they are still there. And in the same way that they cared before in balancing the budget with their small business, or in balancing the budget of their family as they sat around the kitchen counter, those numbers have not evaporated in terms of that being not only numerically important, but important as a value in the way that they looked at politics.
Governor, talk to me about why you. You have not had a great deal of electoral luck in the last few years, although you had a good career. Bill Weld is running against the president. He's actually declared. A lot of people are talking about Larry Hogan. If Republicans are going to move away from Donald Trump, which would be a heavy lift, why do you think you're the guy they should turn to?
Well, it goes back to those first 25 years. So in the 25 years I've been involved in politics, and those were some tough races at times in the House or in governor's races, I didn't get beaten once. I got beat this last go-round based on misalignment with where I am and Trumpism, so to speak, is these days in Republican Party politics. But I think that we need to have a larger conversation on what it means to be a Republican, because I would argue that Trumpism is not it. And in fact, he's pulling us in a direction that is at odds with the very foundation of what the party's traditionally been about and what so many folks at the grassroots level have worked to advance over the years.
So let me just put this a different way. If there's one of you running against Donald Trump, it'll be a heavy lift. If there are 2 or 3 of you, it'll be impossible. Do you talk to other people who are planning on or really think it's important that somebody runs against Donald Trump? Because, if a bunch of you get involved and run against Donald Trump, I'm not sure that's going to succeed.
Well, let's back up. The last time a sitting president did not get their party's nomination was in 1884 with Chester Arthur, our 21st president of the United States of America. And even he was sort of an accident because he got put in place based on Garfield's assassination. So the idea of anybody going out and confidently saying, I'm going to beat Donald Trump, I think is a mistake. What I do think is that we can begin a conversation that has major implications as to our definition of what it means to be a Republican and what's important to us. And historically, it's been every 4 years in the presidential cycle that we've had a conversation as Americans about what it means to be a Democrat, what it means to be a Republican, and what it means to be an American. I think that conversation is taking place on the Democratic side. It needs to take place with more voices on the Republican side.
Well, then what conversation were Republicans having just 2 years ago? Because President Trump hasn't delivered us any surprises. He is today the same person he's always been, and in 2016 you supported him.
Well, I don't think that he would see that as the case. He wouldn't have come out against me.
But you did,
with
sir.
the many things that he said. What's
you
that?
did support President Trump in 2016.
Again, I'm a Republican, so about 90% of my votes would have aligned with things that the Republican Party was advancing. That's completely true. But what I also believe is that there is a fatigue, there is a wear and tear that goes with Trump. He's got to be the center of the storm at all times. And at some point, a hurricane down here on the coast of South Carolina exhausts itself just based on duration and time. And I think that there is a weariness that I'm hearing at the grassroots level with the Daily Trump Show, wherein everybody's reacting to whatever the latest crazy tweet is. And that's not a conversation that leads to discovery or answer on things that really do ail Americans here in this country.
One of the things that's hardened Democrats against this administration, if they needed it, is the fact that the tax cuts, which really benefited corporate America and the wealthy, didn't really pan out for Americans the way it was supposed to be. As a member of the Freedom Caucus, you supported that idea of tax cuts. Has your position changed? Do you look back at those tax cuts and say that's a success, you'd do more, or would you reverse them?
Well, let's back up. No, I support the tax cuts because I'm about getting power and authority out of Washington, D.C. whenever possible. And if it had been a drastic reduction in revenue to the federal government, I would have said otherwise. And you can pull up my Facebook post at the time on the subject. The difference between with or without tax cuts over the 10-year CBO numbers is 2.5%. So you could be for or against the tax cuts, but what you can't say is that it made the difference in deficits going forward. It's about, without the tax cuts, the federal government is expected to take in about $43 trillion over the next 10 years.
Sure, but have the tax cuts paid for themselves?
No, of course they're not going to pay for themselves.
But hold on.
And I've never said that they would.
But the Republican Party did. That's what Paul Ryan did. That's what Steve Mnuchin did.
But I can't own somebody else's words.
You are voting with them.
And it didn't turn out to be true.
Argument. So to say to us, of course it didn't pan out. I'm sorry, sir, but of course just doesn't seem appropriate.
I'm not saying it didn't pan out. Wait. It was originally Ron Wyden's bill. To look, and he's a Democrat from the West Coast, who said we've got to do something about making our corporate environment more inviting for capital and investment.
Sure, and that could be 31% or 29% or 27%, but we got to 21%,
and no
which
loopholes closed.
Isn't even what corporate America asked for, with carried interest still in there. Ron Wyden didn't propose that.
Again, I wasn't for carried interest. I mean, we can go through the subpoints, but the bigger point is this. I made national news at the time when I said this is fundamentally not a middle-class tax cut. It's fundamentally a corporate tax reduction and restructuring bill, and it's a bet that by making our corporate environment more inviting, we might slightly be able to improve the economic growth trend going forward. Because if we don't, we're going to be toast with regard to deficits going forward. We've got to do something about making our economy more vibrant and sustainable going forward, which is why I supported it. You could, again, argue for or against the 2.5% difference over the 10 years, but it's not the delta. It's not what makes the ultimate difference in the deficits going forward over the next 10 years. It's, again, something we might be for or against based on our personal political philosophies.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.